Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, big shout out to guys at MB Models, they've helped with this one. But we will be carrying on with the build of the Yokomo MD 2.0. We got up to part number 8, so this will be parts 9 and then to wherever else we get. But it's going pretty good so far. I don't want to make these videos too long, so I'm going to split it up into bits. But let's not hang about, get you in for a close-up look and see how far we get with this one. Right, so moving on, we're going to want to build up our drive shafts. So we're going to want a little bit of bearing oil. We get that on first. Then we're going to need our black grease that gets absolutely everywhere. So first we want to get a little bit of black grease on his drive shafts. Try not to get covered in it. Then you want to get the little white ends on, and these drive shafts are already built, but we just want to get a little bit of black grease in these. So I'll get that in, and for getting the black grease in, I just get the little 1.5mm X driver and just work it into the end of drive shaft. It'll work its way around. If you spin it round a bit, you can get the excess off. Although this stuff is amazing as grease, the damn stuff gets everywhere. So then we're going to need a bearing on there. Then we're going to need to get the drive shaft in the hub. Then we're going to need a bearing on the outside. And this is one thing that I noticed with both the drift cars. They do actually come with the drive shafts assembled. It does give you full instructions on disassembling them. Then we want to get the pin through, and you want to get your hex in place to lock the pin. Then we want one of the tiny little grub screws. And you're going to want to get your 1.5mm driver and just nip that up. So that'll keep everything in place for you. And then it says the stock setting for this is going to be the outermost hole, and these are the shorter of the ball studs. And then we're just going to need to tighten this down, and it's not telling us to use any spacers or shims, but basically that is one assembled, and you're going to do the other one in exactly the opposite orientation. So I'll get that put together, and then we can move on and see what else we've got. So if all goes well, you should end up with a pair of drive shafts and hubs with the ball studs in that sort of position. So let's move on, see what it's got for us next. So we want that facing backwards, or the motor mount facing towards you. It's a bit awkward to show you on camera because I've got to try and see it. Then we're going to try and get the drive shaft in place and bring this up through the bottom. You want the screw holes in the hub facing away from you. Then we're going to get one of the drive pins and place that in. Then we've got to somehow get a spacer on each side, and this is definitely a lot easier when you're not trying to get it on a camera. Then we've got to get one of these little alloy retainers to sit on top of it all. Then we're going to want one of the tiny screws on each side, and then once you've got all that together, you're then going to carefully tighten down the screw and just nip that down. And then if you flip it over to the other side, we've got another tiny little screw that we need to get in, and then you can just gently nip these both up, and then line your drive shaft back up and you should end up with both sides looking like that. So we're going to want these screw holes facing away, matching the screw holes and these posts. So I'll get the other side fastened on and then see what else we've got. And if all goes to plan, that's what we should end up with. So your hub's fastened, your drive shaft's in, make sure your little white cups are correct. You want your little white cups to be sat the proper way round. So, a lot easier to do when it's not on camera, but don't over tighten these little screws. And you should end up with something that looks kind of like that. Right, let's see what else it's got for us. Right, now we're going to quickly make up two turnbuckles. You want the longer of the turnbuckle ends on these. When you've finished tightening them up, you want the ball joints to be towards the base, and we're going to set these with a gap of 14mm. So get them built up quickly and then we can move on. So now we've got them built up, we're going to get two of our ball studs. You want the smaller washer, then the larger one, and then we're going to screw this into the center hole in the mounts for it, and it's a 2mm driver for this. So we're going to get that done on both sides. So center hole in this mount. It's a little awkward for me to show you on camera from either side, because when I go to put this side in, the spur is going to be in the way. But basically it's in them two positions. Then we're going to want to get these on with the taper on these towards the bottom. So taper at top, but the actual ball stud connection towards the bottom, and we should be able to clip this on the outside and then the inside. And these don't feel too bad at all. It is showing you to put the adjuster sort of designator ring towards the outside, but as long as you put them both same way around, you'll know which way they move to tighten or loosen them. And that should be them all in place. So now we should no longer have the drive shafts falling out, which is nice. And we can move on and see what else we've got. So first off, we're going to need a 2mm driver. We're going to need a 3mm spacer and a ball stud. And it's telling us to fit one of these either side in the lower position on what I think is the steering rack assembly. So we'll get them screwed on and let's see what else we've got. So next we've got to assemble one of the ball studs, and this is the one with the shorter threads. So with that, get that screwed in, two of these in, then two of the remaining smaller spacers. Then we need to screw it down. So it looks like that's the position we're going for. And what I would do on this, because they're tapered and they'll self-locate, get one kind of nipped down and then just fasten the other one. So that should be that part all assembled. So let's move on and see what else we've got. Right, so let's get a little bit of bearing oil on these two. And this, you're going to have to pay a bit of attention to it, because there is some tiny marks on the top bits and they both need to face in. So it looks like first off we're going to need a 3x8 screw, then followed by a pair of these little shims, and then once we've got them on, we have a bearing that sits on top. Then we have one of these little things with the tiny little nick, and apparently that has to face directly inwards. So it's going to be very difficult for me to get this on camera, because that nick is tiny. But they have got a tiny little mark on them. and it says that needs to face straight in. So I'm not sure if moving it in light you'll be able to see it, but that's one assembled. It's not particularly difficult to get it lined up because it's got a hex head in it. So if we aim to get them both pointing exactly at each other, and then we nip it up. So basically you want the nicks facing each other. Not sure if they're slightly eccentric, maybe that's how you adjust them, but that's where it tells us to put them. So we've got that bit assembled. Now let's move on, see what's next. So seeing this bit, I now see how they've got the steering set up. It does make a lot of sense, and I can understand why they're adjustable now. So what we need to do is get a screw in the bottom, then we want a spacer, then we're going to want the actual bearing, and then we've got to try and get that in while we get in everything else lined up. So if his rack's going to sit there, then we've got our bearing, then we've got this one that's also adjustable, and it's telling you to line this one up till the steering assembly moves freely over its whole travel. So that's how we get rid of any play in the actual steering rack. So if you get that so it's kind of tight, and then you can just spin it to where there's absolutely no play whatsoever, but you don't want it binding. And then once you've got it in the position you want it, you can just tighten the whole thing up. I think that one will want backing off ever so slightly. That feels really nice, and there's zero play. Absolutely no slopping it whatsoever. So really happy with that. So the one thing that we're left with is a nut, and I can't see anywhere where we've used that nut yet, but let's crack on, see if we can get this thing built. Right, so moving on, we're on to bag 7. So we've got as 2 screws, I think these are 3x10s that go through the front of that. Then we've got our shims that are also metal, and I must admit the further I get with this kit the more impressive it is. So we've then got to get them screwed on to the actual steering assembly. So for these I'm just going to loosely tighten it because there is another screw that goes in top. I just don't want me spacers falling out or shims. There's a 1mm and a 5mm, sorry, a 1mm and a 0.5, and then in the top we've got another screw. So now I'll just nip that up and nip both these up, and just check to make sure you got no slop still in your steering. So that is all assembled, and we'll move on. So moving on, we're going to need us 1.5mm driver, and you're just going to want to put 2 of these little grub screws, 1 in either side, and when you're putting this together just make sure you got it the right way round, because these have bottoms on them and the back ones don't, and for these it's telling us the stock position is top, and I'm going to stick to the manual on this unless there's something that is obviously not quite right or not how I want it. Now for these screws, don't need to screw them all the way in. You want to keep a few threads at least. And to get them started, if you put the X drive all the way through, and then if you just get your 3mm driver just to tighten it up, we're going to want a spacer, and again just drop the driver through, X drive through it, just so it doesn't try and spin itself in. Then once we've got that assembled, it's now time to fix it onto the steering assembly. So if we get it in place, then we're going to want one screw in either side. And I've got to say, of all the RC cars I've built, and I've built some nice sort of race quality RCs, but I've got to say the entire RC industry should kind of look at the drift scene and see what they're doing. I mean, the drive shaft's being pre-assembled, so all you need to do is grease them. The kind of steering mechanisms that they're using, the quality of the kits, and I mean, yeah, this is not a cheap kit, but neither are any of the race ones. And most of the race ones need an awful lot of money spending on them after you've bought the kit. And I don't just mean electrics. There's a lot of race kits out there that you've got to buy a lot of either aftermarket parts for or option parts to get them just to be reliable. But I digress. We shall carry on. So we're now getting on to parts that making it look a bit closer to finished. So we've got the chassis and the suspension mounts, and these want to go in the 4 holes around where your suspension goes. Make sure you've got your tapered bit to the bottom for the chassis. So we're going to want one in each of the holes where your suspension mounts. And then we just need to get these little caps onto the ball studs. So I'll get them pushed on and then we'll see what else we've got. So we've got all these mounted. Now we need to get some suspension arms. So first off, we need to get these ends screwed onto the arms. So we'll get that done. Now once we've got these on, we need to mount as arms. Now strangely, it doesn't show you which way round the adjustment marks go. It does tell you to make sure that that fastens towards the top, but if they go into there and then that goes on, then I'm guessing the flat would go towards the grub screw in the bottom, but it doesn't actually tell you. It does give you a measurement for these, and it does tell you that it's meant to fasten that way, but looking at it, I'm not sure if you're better off having the adjustment markings on the top or the bottom, because you do have a grub screw trying to tighten up to that, and for me it'd possibly make more sense to have the flat on the bottom, but then this would want spinning round. So yeah, bit of a weird one. Doesn't actually give you any sort of instruction on which way round these measurement marks go or where you fasten the grub screw up to. The original pictures on the instructions show this as completely round, so no flat on it whatsoever. We definitely need to get our screws in this, so we're going to have to put these screws in from the back. So you're going to want 3 screws mounting in each of these, and then get them tightened up. So I've took the only sensible approach with these. Seems as though you're going to need to see the marks when you're using grub screw or it'll be easier to do it that way. I've set them both to the same 15.5mm at the bottom of that, and I've put them that way around so you can see the markings at the same size as grub screw. Of course, I find the grub screw probably going to fasten better to the flat, but let's move on, see what else we've got. So it's showing us that these go on sort of that orientation. You just have to wiggle them around a bit and make sure they sat all the way down. So we've got both his arms on. Then we just need the little clips. And I must admit, from all the RCs I've built, and if you've been watching channel, there's been quite a lot of them, and some of these clips can be an absolute pain, and some of them aren't really an issue at all. Up to now, I've found these are some of the nicer ones to put on. They just seem to clip into place pretty easy. But just take your time when you're pushing these on. Make sure they go home all the way. And the shock pliers seem to work pretty good. Does tell you make sure the taper is on the bottom of these, so this ring is towards the top. But we now have a chassis, and are they front arms? Maybe front arms, yeah. So let's carry on and see how much further we can get with it. So for this next part we need 2 of these smaller turnbuckles, but it does tell you you need to cut 2mm off one of these. So I've done my best to cut 2mm off. Now let's see how well these screw together. It does give you a measurement end to end of 26.2mm you should have. And cutting 2mm off, I would say, is absolutely massively overkill. But it does say in the instructions cut 2mm, but we definitely don't need 2mm cutting off it. I would say that is definitely too much. Yep, that's narrow as damn it. But we've got it cut to length. So let's see what else we need. So next off we've got bearings, so tiny bit of bearing oil in each one of these. Next we've got the longer of the ball studs, and we're going to need a 2mm hex to drive these in. So we're going to want one in that side. We need the longer one. So then one in that side with the little spacers. Then we're going to want our bearing in the top and the bottom, and then on the longer of the 2 arms, then going to want as ball studs. Get that into place. So we can move on, see what else we've got. Right, for this bit we're going to go back and grab our steering assembly, and you want it in the 2 holes that line up just with the suspension arms, and then we're going to want a tapered screw in each one of these. So again, because these are tapered, I'd just get these started before you get the second one tight. So that's that bit done. Let's see what else we've got. So moving on, we've got to get a screw from the bottom through that hole, and we get this in place. just need to nip that up. Once we've got that in place, we're then going to sit our steering assembly down onto it. Make sure those bearings are down, and then we just need to clip our little steering arm on the ball joint and get that in place. So moving on, this is where it all gets slightly disappointing for a £799 kit and a £165 servo. So the servo arm that they give you is a nasty cheap plastic one. The servo mounts, nasty cheap plastic ones. And don't forget to center your servo when you put this on. They also don't provide the servo screw with the kit or with the servo. So come on, Yokomo, you make the kit and you rebrand a servo and you don't provide the screw with either one to fasten your cheap nasty plastic servo arm on. Now, is it really easy to swap it out for alloy? Really doesn't bother me that it's plastic. I run plastic on lots of my other cars, especially the touring cars. I'd rather an arm have a bit of flex than break some part of the suspension or steering. But it's a bit poor that, one, it's a plastic one, but more so that the servo doesn't come with an arm or a screw, and neither does the kit come with a screw. But I digress, we'll carry on. So once we've got that on, we've just got to put the world's nastiest, cheapest looking servo mounts on. And compared to the rest of the kit, the servo mounts are the cheapest, nastiest things that I've seen ever on any RC. I think the only thing that could possibly beat this would be a sort of 60 quid WL Toys where they just have the strap over the servo. Or maybe one of older pan car designs where you literally had nothing holding servo other than a bit of tape. But the only reason I went with this servo is just because I wanted this build to be all yoke. So, and it's red and it matches. So finally we need to fasten this in from the back. I think personally, drift servo wise, I'd go with either the Yantris that's about 50 quid and way higher performance than this, or even an Wtf Rc, because that's what this is. But that is all assembled, so let's crack on, see what else we've got. So now we need to get our servo fastened in. So again, just going with the tapered screws, and it's saying use the center mount positions on the rear and the rearmost mount position on the front. But we're gonna have to get a bit inventive. We have these servo mounts are spaced on servo, so if you just slacken your servo off a little, you can move these, get them into position, and then we can go back to servo, slacken off the mounts, and you've got a little bit of play to line it up, and then we can tighten them up. Once we got them nice and tight, we can then place our steering arm on, and it's telling us to have the tapers both facing the same way. And make sure we don't lose this little bearing, but we should have full throw on the steering without any fouling anywhere. So let's move on, see what else we've got. So we're now going to be making the turnbuckles up, and these are 10.2mm And I just find it easier if you just take a measurement so you've got somewhere to eye it in to where you're screwing them down to. But we'll get these two made up and then carry on. So if we quickly bring this back in. So we need to assemble these onto the steering arms. It's telling us to have the little designated mark facing that side. So let's just get these into position. It's going to be a bit awkward for me to get my hands around these to clip them on. Might have to use pliers. So they don't go on too bad. And you just make sure you have them all facing the same way. Just makes it easier when it comes to adjusting. So we just get them clipped on. Top one should face flat. So let's move on, see what else we've got. So first off, we need to get the ball joint ends fastened onto these. So I'll get that done for both sides. So for these bits, we want the flat to that side and the taper facing upwards. I think this is right, from what I can tell. Then we've got to get one of those little grub screws, get that started. Get these kind of into position and then just nip the grub screw up on the flat. And then it says we're looking for an 8.5mm gap. So it says we need 8.5mm to the base of where the turnbuckle starts, and then we can nip that up. So I'll get exactly the same done on this side and then see what else we've got. So that should be thereabouts what we end up with. So let's move on. So working his way through this part, it looks like we're going to be assembling these on here first and then sliding it into position. So it looks like the default is the bottom innermost, if I'm reading that right. Looks like that's what it's telling us to go for. So then on both of these we'd need two of the smaller shims first. Then we're going to need an arm on either side. Then a bigger shim. And it looks like we're going to get that into position, and then they should line up with the innermost on the same on the front. Then once we've got them into position, if we flip it over, it should just have two of the small screws tapered head, and then we just need to get them into position. So once you get one started, you should then be able to get the opposite side in. Now there is a little bit of play in these, but 0.5 of a mil made it too tight. So if you are going to shim it, I'd grab some 1/4 of a mil shim. But in all honesty, can't really see that making any difference to a drift car. But now we've got them in right place, let's carry on. So moving on, we need two of the tiny little screws to stop us pins dropping out, and they just screw into the center hole on either side of the top arm mount. Were surprisingly easy to swap them shims. Just poke the bars out and you can use the arm to kind of pinch it and hold it in. And it's always a lot more difficult when you're trying to screw these things together and keep everything on camera than it is if you just sat building it and you've got everything held where you want it to be. And these are just the two final screws to hold the front and back part of his steering assembly together. And I must admit, up to yet, I've been at it a good few hours and I'm still really enjoying it. So we've got movable suspension steering now, just need to get rest of it put together. So let's carry on, see what else we need. So moving on, we've got the plate that will retain our steering bearing, and we're going to need 2 of the shorter screws in the top, and then 1 of our screws, longer screws should I say, that goes down through the steering assembly. That all feels pretty good. So let's carry on, see what else it's got. Right, so we're going to want a little bit of bearing oil again. That's got that in. Then we're going to have to assemble as hubs, and apparently there's a mistake in the manual on these. So it tells you to go for this position, and you should actually go for that one. So let's start by getting one of them in. Then we need to get one of these stops in the bottom, and I'm hoping these are 1.5 mil, yep. So we can then get one of them in the bottom. Apparently if you follow the manual you end up with crazy amount of toe out, and it makes it really difficult to drive. So then as top ball stud goes in with no spacer, as bottom ball stud has a shim or a spacer, depending on what you want to call it. There is a few curious decisions on this kit. There's an awful lot of really high-end looking parts, and then every now and again they throw in something that looks cheap and nasty. Not really sure what the sort of thinking is with this. I suppose they always need some part to sell you as a hop up. Then we should get us pin in, and finally we should get us hex on, and again just need a little 1.5 mil hex to tighten this up. But yeah, I think that's the only part. Just move that ball stud from there to there, so we'll get the other one built up exactly the same. So that is them both built up. Now it's telling us to note the position of how these go on, so let's just double check. Yeah, it says as taper should be at the bottom on that one, and taper should be at the top on this one. Let's see if I can get it. Yep. And that one should just clip on, and we should be able to do exactly the same on this side. So 1, 2, 3, and yeah, in that position it doesn't look like it'd have a crazy amount of toe out, but I think that's up to part number 23, so I think we're going to call it a day at that. So there you have it. We've currently got half a drift car, but really enjoying the build so far, and yeah, hope you're enjoying following on. But thanks again for watching Wtf Rc Cars. Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family, and catch you guys again in the next one.